Welcome back. This is Jeff Byers, and this is Module 1, and this is the Sci-Fi Crate Part 8. And we are going to duplicate this model that has edge loops, an edge loop cage on it, we just finished. And we should duplicate it, so I'm going to go ahead and Control D and click on the create new layer and assign selected objects, and I'm going to double click on the layer 2 and rename that let's see, medium crate, and click on save and turn that off. The high poly crate is still on. Make sure that the high poly crate is selected and the V is showing. Here we go. And the next thing, hit the Q key so you get rid of that manipulator tool. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to mesh and we're going to go to smooth. This is how we smooth an object. And every time I say for real, meaning that it is instead of smooth preview, it is really going to be smooth. So I'm going to click on the option box, and we need to smooth it at, let's try 2, and go ahead and click on smooth. There we go. Now that is a high poly model. Okay, no matter how you look at it. So it's got all the nice edges, and it is really a high poly model. So when we bring this in, you can see the cage looks really good. The whole idea about having a nicely defined cage is that now we can add really cool detail using alpha maps with this object. So that makes our lives make our lives a lot nicer. So basically, I prepped it from the beginning, knowing that keeping this in mind, that this is what we're going to send out to either ZBrush or Mudbox. Okay, so this is the part that is going to be exciting to do, and so now we're pretty much prepped for that. So again, I'm going to turn the high poly crate off. I'm going to look at the low poly crate. That's our low poly. This is what we're actually going to UV map. Now that's going to be nice. You're thinking to yourself, oh, that's going to be kind of tough. No, not actually. It's going to be pretty easy. It would be hard to UV map this. So thank goodness we don't have to UV map that. And the medium crate, we will just keep. We're not going to touch that. If we want to make adjustments, this is where we go to make adjustments, and then we can duplicate it again and then create a high poly from there. So if you would like to make adjustments, that's why we save all this stuff. I saved my medium. That's basically I call it a medium, but it's just your edge loop cage model. And then you use your high poly model for baking and sculpting and all that stuff. So you sculpt it and then you bake all the normal maps onto the low poly, which is this guy right here, and taking you through the whole entire process. So in a nutshell, you create your high poly and your low poly, and then you bake your normal maps from your high poly to your low poly, so it has all the details in the low poly. And that's how they do things in game art right now. Now things are going to change here pretty soon, like I said, with Unreal 5. But the thing is, I still got to teach you this process, because some game companies, like Unity game engines, still need to have this type of modeling done. And there's some use for it. You know, just because you can throw a billion polygons at a game engine doesn't mean you should throw a billion polygons at a game engine. So even though it's exciting technology and I'm gonna be having fun with it, I still have to teach you guys the fundamentals, and this is what's so important. Alright, so the next thing is that we will save once again, file, save scene as, and 12. Now when you're going to be graded, you're going to be giving me screenshots of your high poly and your low poly and your medium poly. So you need to have all those. Make sure you keep all this stuff and save your scenes. There's nothing I can do if you mess up and your scenes are gone or you don't know where you put your scenes. So really pay attention to what you're doing, and I think a lot of this has to do with good file management. Know where your scenes are at all times. Make sure you set up your scene the way I wanted you to set it up in the first place. And I know where this scene is. I can minimize Maya, go right into my computer, go into Documents, go into Maya, go into my projects, and here it is, JBuyers Module 1, and under Scenes you can see all my saves all the way to 13. So your folders are really important, because if I render out my scene, all my images, all my renders will go into the images folder, so that makes sense. All your textures will go in your source images folder, so you need to remember that. So you need to know where your file system is at all times so you can manage yourself. If you throw stuff everywhere, this is part of management. So all your textures go into source images. Your scenes should be set to your scenes folder, and all your scenes should go in there, and your rendered images should go in there. Now there's other data like OBJs and FBXs that go into the data folder. We also have audio files that you can put in your data file as well. So, into your sound folder. So there's certain spots that you need to have your objects go to, and when we get into those areas, the specialty areas like lighting and rendering and texturing and all that stuff, that texturing will be the next module. But you need to know how to manage yourself. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to go back in here, and we're all set up. Just click on your high poly now, and we are going to go ahead and clean everything up. So we're going to go to let's go ahead and center the pivot, delete by type history, and freeze transformations. So we're going to hit all three of those before we send anything out. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go to File, and we're going to go to Export Selection. Export Selection, we are going to scroll down to OBJ Export. Okay, and then we're going to go Export Selection. And we are going to call this, always put your first and last name on there. And we're going to call this SciFi Crate. High poly, just call it high. There we go. Save that out. Alright. And turn that off, and then your low poly crate. Okay. We're going to make sure it's selected and go to File, Export Selection, go into the option box, and make sure it's on OBJ Export, Export Selection. I'm going to go ahead and click on this one and just turn the crate high to low, L-O-W. There we go. So we've got a SciFi crate that's high poly, and then we got a SciFi crate that's low poly. Okay. Now they must be occupying the exact same space. Okay. So when we look at these, you can see that there might be discrepancies between the two. Okay. So if I go to the side view, the high poly is a little bit taller than the low poly. So I might want to take the low poly and move it up. I'm going to hold the Alt key and the arrow and just move that up into place. And you just got to make sure that they're occupying the same space, which is hard to do if you're modeling these like totally separate. Since I thought about this ahead of time and how I was going to model this, it was a lot easier for me to manage my scene so that my high poly, let's go ahead and you can see the high poly next to the low poly. So the low poly is underneath there. So now that I've moved it up, what I want to do with the low poly is make sure it's selected. Let me turn the high poly off a minute. And do the same thing. Center pivot, delete by type history, and freeze transformations. And let's go ahead and save the low poly again just to make sure it's clean. So export selection. Alright, cool. Export selection. There we go. Let's go to low again. Okay, so one thing I always forget that we need to think about too is scale. When we get to a very small scale, things become very difficult to render, and they're difficult to light. And the thing is, I like modeling in centimeters because I have this freedom that I don't clip, and I can get pretty close without clipping. But if you notice that if I get too close, it will start clipping, and if it doesn't, and if you start seeing that clipping with your work, it's easy to get in there and go to View, Camera Attribute Editor, and you have to do it for each one of these view panels, but Camera Attribute Editor, and you have a near clip plane. Okay, that means that if you put a 0, make it smaller, then you can get closer. So I'm going to put a 0 in front of there, so now I can get really, really close. And let's say you zoom out a little bit and you start losing the image. It disappears, or you can't see it. You want to type in a number, another 0 in front of the decimal point, and hit enter. So just remember those two things, and that's found under View, Camera Attribute Editor, and you're looking for camera attributes near clip plane and far clip plane. This will happen to you sometime, and if it does, now you know how to fix it. Okay. Also, if you run into issues or something, again, I've got my hours online that I'm available, meaning that I would like check my emails at those certain points of time. And the longest you're going to wait is probably an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. But what I would like you to do, if you do try to, discuss or tell me what the problem is, send me a snapshot. Okay? And how do you do that? Well, you can send me a snapshot by going down at the right-hand corner next to your Windows, if you have a Windows computer or Windows system, operating system. You can type in S. Okay? And that, just type in S, and you can open up the snipping tool. So if you click on that, that'll open up this little snipping tool, and you go to Mode. This is how you use it. Rectangular snip. And I just want you to just do a quick little, and you can do anything there's a problem. You can do your whole window if you want to, and then bring it into Photoshop or something and point arrows at what you're having problems with, and just snip that, and just go to File, Save As. Make sure you know where you're putting it. Always know where you're putting your stuff, guys, because that's how you lose stuff. And I usually put everything on the desktop and then I put it in folders and then put it on my hard drive. Anyway, go ahead and name it, save it. Always put your first name on there and the last name. That's so I know who it is, and save it out. Okay? So that's how you do a screenshot. It's pretty simple. Okay, so if I ask for screenshots, that's what you do. Yeah, you want to make sure you do all JPEGs. I prefer JPEGs, okay, when you send me stuff. Alright. Alright, so that's how you save out your work. We're talking about scale. How do we get scale up here? And it's really important that we add scale. So down at the very bottom right hand corner is a guy that's running away from a gear. That's your settings, your preferences, and this is how you set up your preferences. So you can see that under settings, okay, if you click on, I'm in preferences, and there's another way to get there too. You can go to Windows, you can go to settings, preferences, and you can go to settings, and you can go in here to centimeters, and that's what we're working in. Okay, I prefer that, and some people prefer just to work in feet right away, to cause you from doing what I'm going to do now. So I can go to feet. I just don't like working in feet, but it does have its advantages. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to do Control A. That's a way to get back to your channel editor and your display, your layers. So I'm going to turn both of these on. Okay, the low poly, and I'm going to click on the props and even the medium crate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of those guys. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and delete by type history, freeze transformations, and I'm going to group these. So I'm going to go to edit, group. So I selected everything, I highlighted everything, and then I'm going to group them all together. What that's going to allow me to do now is it allows me to scale everything up together. Okay? All as one object. But make sure you center pivot, delete by type history and all that stuff. And then let's go ahead and I'm going to hit the R key and scale it up. So this is basically 4 feet long, okay, by 2 feet tall. Okay, you can make it bigger if you want to, but let's go. What would that be? 3 feet, 6 feet by 3. Yeah, it's pretty big. 6 by 3. There we go. That'll work. So there it is. There's my crate. And I went ahead and scaled everything up together all at one time. Right. So when you do that, I can turn everything off a minute. You can see everything's looking okay. Here's my medium. Let's go to the low poly and my props and make sure everything looks okay. You can see that in feed it does act kind of strange. You can see why people don't like modeling. I don't like modeling in feed, but I don't mind putting everything in groups, and I've never had an issue with scaling things up. So now that I've got it all completed, okay, you see how that it looks like those bolts are going through, but they're not. That's the problem with Maya's feet, and sometimes these things just don't scale up right. There's some things that didn't scale right, but we can fix those later. Okay, I'm not too worried about it right now at this point. All right, so what we do need to do is make sure, I'm going to hit the Q key, make sure that we save these out at this larger size, because baking will work better. Okay, baking will actually work better if it's in feet. So just remember that. Baking maps, the high poly to the low poly will bake better maps. Let's go to File, and let's go to Export Selection and do an export again. And this time I'm just going to, instead of going over top of it, this is the low poly, going over the top of it, I'm going to put in underscore fin, finished, so I know that is finished. And then I'm going to turn that off and turn the high poly crate on and go to File, Select, Export Selection, and do the same thing. This time this will be high finished. Okay, so that just means high poly. And export selection. So basically up to this point I've done everything exactly what I need to do, and now we're ready to import in our meshes. And I have a high poly in centimeters and I have a high poly in feet. I've got a low poly in centimeters and a low poly in feet, so if we have any issues or anything, we can kind of experiment and work with both of those. And that'll do it for this video, and in the next video we're going to start talking about how to add incredible detail in Mudbox. Alright, I'll see you in the next video.